Welcome, everybody. My name is Cami. I use she, they pronouns. I'm currently the Cultural Sustainability Coordinator in the Student Sustainability Center. I'm getting my Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, and I kind of hope to work with children and families. I've worked in preschools before, so that's just some of my work experience. But I'm really passionate about uplifting people and empowering people to feel control over their lives and just be able to control their anxieties and conquer them and their barriers to doing what they want. And I also want to acknowledge that I'm not perfect, and this journey with myself and my journey with internalized fat phobia is ongoing and still a very sensitive and intimidating topic to talk about. And because of the different opinions and stigmas against fat people, and one way I'm combating these feelings are continuing to talk to people about fat phobia, unlearning things along my journey, and reinforcing to myself that my body is beautiful. It looks different at different times of the day, the month, the year, and that I should be focusing on things that make me feel good instead of perpetuating different diet cultures or body shaming, and punishing or pushing me further away from my goals. And so without further ado, I'm going to begin my presentation on talking about fat phobia and belonging in the environment. And if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or at the end, I'll probably have some time for questions, or you can just interrupt me sometime in between. So first, I just want to introduce the term fat phobia and where it came from. So fat phobia really wasn't present since the beginning of human time. Up until really the late 1700s, rounder fat bodies were a symbol of abundance and prosperity. And after the transatlantic slave trade in 1526, which slowly led to new articulations of what bodies were deemed appropriate, there were changes in what types of bodies were deemed appropriate and what bodies people wanted to see and thought should be seen. So I'm going to leave it to this TikTok creator to talk a little bit about racialization of fat bodies and how fat phobia is linked to white supremacy.
How is fat phobia linked to white supremacy? Congratulations, class. That's a great question. If you want to learn more than what I mentioned here today, please read this book. Fat phobia, like most social phobias, is ultimately the cause of systemic oppression. Fat bodies have been racialized since, you guessed it, slavery. Fat phobia stems from an Enlightenment era belief that fatness is actually linked to savagery and racial inferiority, which has then subsequently been used to subjugate Black bodies into slave labor, exploitation, fetishization, and sexualization. Slave masters used the fatness found in Black female bodies as an excuse to say, those women are deserving of rape, but you, your slender self, you're not. Since abolition, the U.S. government has tried to the obesity epidemic and all comorbid diseases like heart disease and diabetes on Blackness and on the Black population as a way to say our healthcare system is overwhelmed by those people and those are your tax-paying dollars.
Shit about, oh, I know her.
And so that's just an introduction of some of the history of fat phobia, and we'll continue to talk about how fat phobia is linked to white supremacist views in white culture. And so it's not really until the 1900s when capitalist consumer culture begins to take off in the US and we see a rise in diet culture and fat phobia that will be spread around the world.
How is fat phobia linked to white supremacy?
So now we're going to talk more about the impacts of fat phobia on globalization culture. And so prejudice against fat phobia has been spread to cultures that originally believed in thick and prosperous bodies. So one study I'm going to introduce is a study that listened to the voices of women of size in North America and Finland, indicating that there is a shared body experience of being fat. And based on their cross-cultural analysis in this study, their findings they argue that their findings were that there is a shared Western fat lived experience that perpetuates a stigmatized gendered landscape of living with a fat body. The emergent themes tended to revolve around two similar contradictions. The phenomenon of hyper-invisibility and visibility, and a belief that their fatness is temporary or liminal state, both which lead to an internalization of fat hatred. They argue that these findings stem from the tremendous stigma and mistreatment that both samples of women faced and in their daily lives. And further, something interesting that they found was because Finland was actually less prosperous and industrialized than its neighbors, and it wasn't until around 1960 that capitalist consumer culture arrived in full effect, or it wasn't until the 1980s that capitalist consumer culture arrived in full effect in Finland. And in the fat studies scholarship, the intensification of fat stigma and discussion of oppressive gendered body norms were typically connected with American style capitalist culture and consumerism. So that just again links fat phobia and this kind of consumerist capitalism culture that we know in our culture in the US. And so then I'm going to also talk about an experience that I had growing up. So I grew up on an island in Hawaii called Kauai. And culturally, in Hawaii, where I grew up, the men of Pacific Islanders were not considered fat or shunned. They were considered strong, healthy, prosperous, and attractive. And women dancing hula were not shunned for their bellies. They were applauded for their talent and beauty and ability to dance and share a story that will continue to pass down traditions to others. However, because my parents were white and I grew up within diet culture, being skinny was pushed on me so much. And even though I played soccer and went to school, I still would hate my body and refrain from doing things in this beautiful place that I lived because of my body and because of how my culture and upbringing affected my feelings over my body. And so this is going to be just a small video of how different cultures don't think the same way that white culture thinks about bodies. And so, yeah, this is just an example of that.
Oh, you're so fat. Now, thank you, madam. We thank God, we are doing very good. We are eating very well. What about you now, madam? Look at you. You are looking very... Are you okay? Are you well? Do you need food? Do you have money? Because your back part is looking very... Where are the mountains? Where are the caves? You are hungry, I beg. Don't worry, we go get food for you to chop. Chicken!
So as demonstrated in this video, there's a lot of different perceptions of what a body should look like depending on where you grew up. It's US media systems that just perpetuate this around the world because of how forceful they are. And so with the rise of beauty standards and this push of consumerist culture, there became a demand to look a certain way. And so thus was created the diet industry that is now worth $71 billion. And a lot of it is based on instant gratification of looking the way that you want within a certain short period. And not a lot of it focuses on making sustainable life changes that give you the correct nutritional information and education that you need to be able to make those informed decisions about nutritional education. And so you can think about how fat phobia is perpetuated by thinking about a lot of the influencers that you know. So if you just think of the top 5 influencers that you think of or that come on some of your social media pages, maybe just take note of what characteristics they have that continue to be perpetuated throughout our culture. And so next I'm going to talk a little bit about my life and how I was impacted by fat phobia and diet culture. And so these are all pictures of me at different points of my life. And so fat phobia has controlled a lot of aspects of my life. And in all of these pictures, I remember at the time of the photo, the thing I was most scared about was looking fat. My friends were mostly skinny where I grew up, but not all of them. And even though I grew up in, again, a really beautiful island, I would never go to the beach because of my insecurities of the way I looked. One of my friends, when I told them I was doing this presentation, reminded me of one time when we were in 4th grade together doing the presidential fitness test. And I remember that we had to be weighed during the testing, or she reminded me. And although I was playing soccer like pretty much every day at the time, and I finished all of the qualifications for the presidential fitness challenge, I was still fat shamed by my physical ed teacher when she weighed me and looked at me and called me big boned. And looking back at that, it was probably her as a white 50-plus-year-old woman teacher who was always trying to lose weight, projecting her internalized fat phobia onto me to perpetuate those feelings that I had about myself and maybe she had about herself. And so this is what I looked around that time, 2013, there was my soccer team. And so then in 2016, I did a study abroad. I was a junior in high school and I went to Argentina for a year to do a cultural exchange. Basically, we just got to stay with different host families and go to a high school. But I remember I had a similar experience that I did in Kauai where I would have a lot of anxiety about my fatness and feeling like I don't fit in and the people thought less of me and internalizing these feelings and blaming them on my body. And so after I came back from that and finished high school, I ended high school with a really bad sense of self, just because after coming back, there's sort of like a reverse culture shock from coming back from exchange that you'll sometimes hear about. But I was also just finishing my last year of high school and I was over 200 pounds and I started college and I began my journey in losing weight and I kind of made my own diet culture up at this point. Because up until this point, my mother had been pushing different diets on me that she wanted to do herself. So diet culture had been around in my life since around the 5th grade. Just for the basic idea that I needed to get rid of my belly or my thighs needed to look a different way. So basically, I began eating at a deficit and working out most every day. I would run quite a bit as fast as I could to burn a bunch of calories and try to eat under 700 calories a day. And at this point in time, I would get so many compliments on my body, but I still saw myself as fat. And I had a lot of internalized fat phobia that I was not deconstructing on this journey. And like predicted, this period of eating so few calories was not healthy for me. I was low in a lot of vitamins. I was dizzy a lot. I felt strong because I was working out, but I also felt really weak. I was happy with my thin appearance, but at what cost, I thought. After moving to Portland in around 2019, this gym culture I had was not sustainable for me. I had a new job at Helen Gordon Child Development Center, and I was exhausted from the harder classes and less alone time. And like many people, starting college again, I gained weight, but since then I've been on a journey of weight fluctuation and accepting the fluctuation of my weight, acknowledging how I'm treating these fluctuations. This has been one way I can unlearn the fat phobic thoughts that have been instilled in from me and from white consumerism culture. And so now I'm actively shutting down my fat phobic thoughts when I think of them and my partner and I talk about our bodies, sometimes I think, or I know that sometimes he doesn't think his body is beautiful, but I wouldn't want him to think that. So I have to do the same for myself, where I wouldn't, I know I wouldn't want him to say bad things about his body. So I try not to say them about myself because I know that they wouldn't want to hear that either. But as an athlete, we have such a weird relationships with our strong bodies and our fatness that it's just a really weird relationship. But it's ongoing, and it's important to just recognize how you're feeling and why you might be feeling those ways. And so now we'll talk a little bit about fat phobia and the environment. So fat phobia or fat bodies have often been categorized as dangerous or unacceptable. And this is not the first time that white culture has used this terminology, as we already have heard. Words continues to be used in tribal stigma, an abomination of the body, and a blemish of individual character, reducing people's abilities to their disabilities, appearance, or other forms of their presentation. And all of this has led to generations of a lot of judgmental thinking, offensive slurs and terms, and at least for me personally, a disconnection from the environment and other people because of how fat phobia had impacted my mental health and feeling of belonging in the outdoors. And so within the environmentalism movement, if you'll look, it's largely been headed by white cis heterosexual people that are skinny, or as our studies called it, Nordic looking. As someone who grew up in a culture connected to people or connected to the land, I was interested in the longevity of the planet, treating the planet kindly, and dismantling the systems of environmental racism that I would see every day in towns nearby. I never saw Hawaiian environmentalists or environmental theory acknowledged. And then we think about permaculture, which is a widely known part of the environmentalism movement now. And a lot of permaculture principles and theories were actually just rebranded from indigenous knowledge and traditions whose voices continue to be left out of the conversation of environment, and whose land continues to be destroyed by white environmentalists or other entities. And further, diet culture has been largely influenced by white environmentalism through veganism and a toxic meat eater versus vegan polarization of what an environmentalism should be. And so we're starting to see a small change within the sector of intersectional environmentalists, but there's still a lot of environmentalists that don't understand what intersectionality is and why some people, why like meat is connected to a lot of people's culture and they grew up with meat. And so to just project veganism onto a lot of people is just a lot of times disrespectful towards that person and their culture and their beliefs. And so it's something that, as environmentalists, knowing the impact of the meat industry, we can be aware of raising awareness about the meat industry and talking about, the deficits of it and what can be worked on. But, it's also still important to talk about what the veganism industry can work on, and just talk about and just continue to uplift people instead of putting them down for what they choose to eat, talking about maybe more sustainable meat or sustainable products that people can buy, rather than pushing down what they're eating, or just asking questions purely, and understanding people's circumstances, and that sometimes meat is really a big part of our culture, and it's hard if you don't have a lot of money to continue to buy vegetables, to continue to buy different products. It can be a lot harder to continue a vegan or vegetarian diet that's healthy for you and your entire family. So it's something that us as environmentalists need to really continue to think about. And so now we're going to talk about a little bit about privilege of exercise, outdoors, and dieting. So the first thing we'll talk about is money. So for a lot of things within diet culture, within different types of workout culture and outdoor culture, you need money for a lot of different things, whether it be transportation, food, just the ability to take off work and not have to work that day, or to get childcare. There's a lot of things that go into being able to exercise, pay for a gym, pay for someone to watch your child while you're doing all of this, or yeah, there's a lot of different things you could probably think of. And then there's the ability and being able-bodied to exercise. Although with the destigmatization, you know, we're starting to see more people create different exercises for different abilities, but we have to continue destigmatizing, like how fat people have been stigmatized with being lazy and not moving. Also, we need to continue to work on that towards finding ways where people with disabilities can continue to move their body or do what's good for them in their capacity. And again, just continue uplifting people and asking them what they feel comfortable with and bringing new ideas, instead of just giving up on people because they think that it's some sort of deficit to their body or their ability to be a person. And then there's just the ability to get to a gym or trail. Like I said, some trails, like you'll see, are pretty far away, like at least half an hour, 45 minutes most of the time to get to a lot of popular trails. So that's a big one. You're really limited to the amount of transportation you have. I know that I always have to rely on a friend, like I said, that has a reliable car to be able to get to those trails that are farther out, or if I want to go camping and stuff like that. So it's just something to really keep on your mind when you're thinking about you know, someone's ability to exercise or go places. There's a lot of privilege in being an outdoor influencer. And that's why you'll see a reflection in that. In outdoor influencers, they're a lot of times privileged people. Although we do, like, they'll be able to go to quite a few destinations with the job, either by making money as an influencer or just because they have that leniency in their life. And then we're going to talk a little bit about body dysphoria in the gym and outdoors. And so, like I brought up earlier, from my experiences, I had a lot of body dysphoria outdoors. And even still, like if I'm going out, there's a lot of body dysphoria and like you thinking people are looking at you, and this like spotlight effect that we have, where we like project our insecurities that people can think, or that are thinking what we are thinking in our head, even though they might not be thinking about that at all and might not be noticing you. You internalize these like feelings of anxiety that people are looking at you or judging your body and such. And so that perpetuates for a lot of people in the gym and outdoors, whether it be hiking trails, the beach, just walking around the neighborhood, getting on a bike. I mean, I've heard it quite a few times, even within my own social spheres, of just like judgment of fat people outdoors or in a gym. And so it's really important to shut those thoughts down and realize that those are rooted in a lot of fat phobic thoughts. And then, yeah, the last one is just time and resources to go to the gym alone, take the day off. Gyms are really expensive if you don't have a large income. And so $100 gym has always been quite a bit of money. So just being able to afford the gym and to afford, like, hopefully have that your partner doesn't have to work and you have someone to take care of kids if you have that, or taking the day off to travel to a trail or go camping. Yeah, there's a lot of privilege in that. And also for dieting, A lot of diets cost money. There's a lot of products that are involved within dieting, but also a lot of times involve going to a gym or buying some sort of workout videos. But there is a higher accessibility rate now, especially with the pandemic, but even before then, of workout videos that people can do at home. But a lot of times, it's much harder for people to be motivated to do home workouts. And so if that's the only option and people are dysphoric about going outside, it really limits people's ability to work out and move their body. And so we're next going to talk about how fat people have been taking back their bodies and how people have been taking back the environment and similar movements. And so I'm not the first one to recognize these beauty standards. They've been around for a long time, and there's a lot of advocates that are going against beauty standards. And so Tess Holliday, who is this person in the middle, started a campaign on Instagram. I believe she's a plus size model. I'm not sure what her other jobs have been, but that's what she kind of advertises herself for. And her campaign, F Your Beauty Standards, was a campaign where people can take pictures of themselves, celebrating aspects of their bodies that do not necessarily conform to normative standards of beauty, with a community that embraces such breaks from conformity. A lot of people have critiqued her, saying that she's promoting an unhealthy lifestyle as a model of her weight, but Tess continues to break down barriers for plus size people by posting videos of her active and working out and doing different things in the gym. And so that's just a visual disruption that she has been doing. And these stigmas reach beyond fat bodies, and similar words such as dangerous or unacceptable, like I said, have been used in tribal stigma, abomination of the body, and blemish of individual character that continue to reduce people to their ability to reduce people to their body, and is highly gendered and culturally specific. So it's important to rewire our brains to recognize that these biases are hurtful, untrue, and rooted in able-bodied white supremacy. Capitalism is selling us so many things about what we should look like that we never truly connect with our own bodies, knowing what feels good to us. And so this is a video about hikers that have been taking back, with similar visual disruptions, the environment, and just talking about how people have been excluded from the environment.
The outdoors belongs to everybody. The trees don't care what color you are. I'm Katina Graves. I'm 45 years old. I am the outdoor Afro leader in the New York City community.
There's not much ticks in like the Bronx or anywhere.
No, definitely not in the Bronx. For Serafina, I want her being in nature to be such a fluid part of just how she grew up that she will never have to explain to someone why did she start hiking as a Black person.
When we went hiking this time, it was a little longer than the other one.
Yeah, it was really much longer.
Yeah, and I walked like 5 whole miles.
I think I've always known that the trails that I was hiking on wasn't diverse. I took it as, what can I do? I do believe if you see something that you want to be different, you actually have to be a part of providing that solution. I'd been an avid hiker before becoming an Outdoor Afro leader, but I'd followed Outdoor Afro on social media. In their Instagram account, they post amazing pictures of Black people enjoying the outdoors. It's sort of like to disrupt the visual representation of like hikers are tall, thin, Nordic, blonde people. We want to remove barriers to entry for folks to experience the outdoors. And it feels like a calling. It feels like something that needs to happen.
Hopefully the scooter don't mess up the elevator.
Let's hope not, right? You know, in New York, one of the things I get more often than not is transportation. I am also a New Yorker who doesn't have a car. A lot of folks here don't. And so that's a huge barrier to entry. I had to learn how to access the outdoors here.
Did you see how high I went?
Our new hikers with us say as to why they've never hiked before. I don't really like bugs. I don't like to sweat. Because of the history of keeping Black people from public spaces in the outdoors, we actually need to understand that some of those fears are not just about bugs. I think it's important that we're honest about the history of our country, in that there was a time when, you know, pools were segregated and parks were segregated. That experience is real, and some of that, like, I don't know if you call it like historical memory, right? That sort of runs through generations of people, can very much affect whether you feel safe outside. But through Outdoor Afro, what we're trying to do is actually really build a community so that folks understand that, like, we can talk about that sort of raw past and why it matters that we're outside now, and why it matters that we also reclaim these spaces that belong to all of us. We don't charge people for hikes. Financial implications of how folks get to and from trails is something that I think about all the time. From an environmental impact perspective, I actually think it's wonderful that I can get a whole group of people to a hike using public transit. We tend to do an opening circle so folks get an opportunity to introduce themselves.
I'm Reggie, I live in the Bronx.
My name is Diane, I am from Harlem.
I have always people who are new to the group. Diane is new to us today, so welcome, Diane. And I have people who are usually returners on every hike.
There is this perception that Black people don't do outdoor things, and I do a lot of outdoor things. It's just that oftentimes I'm out doing things and I'm the only one in the group who looks like me.
What's nice is seeing people who started with me, you know, a couple years ago, and they had never been to an Outdoor Afro event. 3 years later, they're part of my returning crew and they're welcoming new people. Every event is an opportunity to share Black history. Initially, George Washington was against Blacks being in the Revolutionary Army, but the British governor of Virginia actually put out an offer that said, any slave that ran away to freedom to join the British Army, you would be given your freedom. So that actually led to George Washington really having to change his position. Being an Outdoor Afro leader has actually been an emotional experience for me in a couple of ways. I realized, like, wow, I found my people, like I found my tribe. This sense of belonging is deeply emotional for me. So last year I was a part of the Outdoor Afro team that climbed Kilimanjaro. That whole experience was emotional, and it was emotional before we left. And then to be able to share that experience with my daughter is so deeply meaningful to me. And I think because what I learned, what I experienced with people, I get to pour that back into her.
Serafino, what do you think of the waterfall?
I like it really a lot.
You do? Why?
Because it's so loud and I love the way it's coming down to the rock.
We are creating space for the next generation of Black people to really have this experience. The outdoors belongs to everybody. And I think that's true across folks who are differently abled, across folks who are different sizes, come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Hikers look like me, they look like you, they look like lots of people.
So yeah, that video was really meaningful to me, and it just made me think about when I would go hiking and see groups of friends that were all like plus size, or just different groups of people, and the feeling of belonging that I felt, that, oh, I'm not the only one here, and the way that they were also having visual disruptions, like she said, it's really impactful, and just remembering that the environment is for everybody and the outdoors is for everybody, and it's really important to make them accessible so that everyone has a sense of belonging, that they can be there. And it's so important and cool that these groups exist that are helping people break these barriers to the environment, helping them figure out what trails are accessible by public transit, and going in a group together to get to those trails.
The outdoors belongs to everybody.
And so there's some backlash at fat activism and controversy. And so there's sometimes an idea of what a good fat person should be that we still need to break down. Because as you've seen previously in the picture, a lot of people were dressed up and modeling. But there's also fat people that exist that don't want to do that and don't do that. I know that I rarely dress up and look that way. And so taking a picture where I'm not dressed up, um, it feels differently. And so as it does for most people, but just dismantling this idea of what a good fat person is with the appropriate way to dress or look, whether it be covering your belly lines or like in the previous slide, how the one of the guys had their entire belly out. It's like you rarely see that on social media. And I notice it a lot where a lot of plus size clothing are high waisted because they make us feel more comfortable with our bodies because you can kind of conceal that more. But I think it was really empowering to see someone with their belly out because it's just that's truly taking your body back. That's truly like thinking about your relationship with yourself and your body. And I always find it really empowering when people will just post completely candid pictures of them and their bellies and their bodies. And another person that I've seen do it a lot on social media is Mary Lambert, who she was the featured artist on Macklemore's song Same Love, and she's an activist and she writes books and songs, but a lot of her social media posts are within talk about fat phobia, talk about her journey with her own body and activism. And it's been really inspiring to see more fat environmentalists and environmentalists that look many different ways, kind of taking their space in social media and in the outdoors, and showing people that there's a lot of different types of people that can be outdoors and are outdoors. And so other features that the typical good fat person might have are white European features conforming to other beauty standards. And also this idea of healthy foods is often, like we kind of talked about, culturally inappropriate because someone's access to food or the culture that they grew in food, if white culture has deemed those foods unhealthy or not as healthy, then we're really seeing how white culture is controlling food systems and controlling the foods that are presented to people. And so this, I'm going to share the article for this in the chat, or maybe just share my references after the presentation. But it talks about eating disorders, and one of the most prevalent eating disorders in marginalized communities being binge eating disorder. And it wasn't even added as a real eating disorder or recognized as a real eating disorder until 2013, which is surprising. But it just shows how eating disorders have gone unreported, undiagnosed, and untreated. And on top of that, the white supremacist narrative that arrived with colonialism tells people of color that they're ugly, inferior, not smart, and disposable. But it's really if self-love is not there, then people don't take care of themselves, and that moves on into fat phobia and how it's really important to have that self-love and take care of yourself, because if not, you're going to continue to foster this self-hatred that is a part of developing eating disorders. And so I feel like that's a really important part, that we remember that regardless of what type of society we live in, disease always exists and disabilities have always existed. And so we have to stop marginalizing health and actually take action. We have to start addressing health disparities, food deserts, and low self-esteem, and start talking about white supremacy and fat phobia, and combat the systemic issue that are hindering people's ability to exceed in their self-esteem and their worth. And it's how we help people heal by actively working to remove the stigma attached to bodies of marginalized people. And so this are going to be one of my last videos about decolonizing the food system and kind of what that means that food systems have been controlled by white supremacy.
Coming up on this mini episode of The Doctor's Pharmacy.
I do think that the reverence that we have for the earth, by extension the way we treat the land, is going to be mirrored in the way we treat ourselves and our human communities.
Hi, I'm Kea Perowit, one of the producers of the Doctor's Pharmacy podcast. Many of our sustainable farming practices stem from African and indigenous roots, yet racial and ethnic disparities are sadly alive and well when it comes to how food is grown in the U.S. This has not only led to the decline of the Black, brown, and Native farmers, but contributes to the racial health disparities we see in this country as well. Dr. Hyman sat down with Leah Penniman at the end of last year to discuss these topics. Leah is a Black Creole educator, farmer, author, and food justice activist from Soul Fire Farm in Grafton, New York.
Now, I think people don't realize the magnitude of the health disparities that exist out there. I know diabetes, heart disease, chronic illnesses, kidney failure, hypertension that affect Black and indigenous people, Native Americans, Latinos, far more than whites. If you're African American, you're 80% more likely to be diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You're 4 times as likely to have kidney failure. You're 3.5 times more likely to have amputations from diabetes as whites. And it also somehow connects to sort of how our whole system is operating. It's almost like a weapon that is used against these populations, not necessarily intentionally always, but it sort of has been the unintended result of our food policies, of our ag policies. And, the way I think about it is we're facing an unprecedented proliferation of biological weapons of mass destruction. Our processed food, which kills literally 40 to 50 million people a year globally from hypertension. So how do you see the role of the farmer shifting this systemic violence, these biological weapons of mass destruction, as I call them? And how do we do that?
I mean, what you said is so powerful because food has intentionally been used as a weapon. I mean, you look at the Greenwood food blockades that were used to punish civil rights activity, literally cutting off food supplies to Black communities in the 1960s for the audacity to try to register to vote. And so I actually don't think it's an accident that our schools, our urban schools, our prisons are filled with these highly processed foods because a population that's not well is not going to resist. If I'm not feeling well and I'm dealing with diabetes, kidney issues, I'm not going to show up for a town hall and tell my senator what they should be doing, right? And so I don't think it's entirely an accident, but I do believe it's not just farmers who are responsible for the solution. It's obviously everyone in the food system. But farmers do have a unique role to play because we have an opportunity, one, to see where our food's going and to do what we can to make sure there's equitable distribution. We have the opportunity to make sure that our farm workers are treated fairly, signing on to programs like the Food Justice Certified. And we have a unique voice where we can really get bipartisan ear. Farming is considered a everybody kind of issue. So we can be telling policymakers about the shifts that need to happen on a systemic level.
Exactly. And I think, we are seeing a farm system that also, has generated out of a series of policies that have led to the overproduction of these highly processed foods, and the poor and minorities are targeted by the food industry with extra marketing for these foods. When SNAP or food stamps come on with your monthly stipend, it's usually at the beginning of the month, and that's when there's maximum advertising in all these bodegas and local stores for more soda and more junk food. So it's a sort of an intentional process. And the other thing that is that I've not well understood, I think my most, is that your cognitive development depends on your nutrition. So if you're growing up in a poor community with lack of access to nutritious food, with lack of vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients and all the things you need to create your healthy brain, these kids are not going to be cognitively where they need to be. I mean, even the exposure on farms to pesticides, these kids have lost 41 million IQ points in farm and food workers, which are among the most dangerous occupations in this country because of the use of these industrial agricultural chemicals. So, we have both the issue of food justice, but we also have the environmental racism and environmental justice that's connected to the food system, because most of the workers on farms today are brown, mostly Latino workers or migrant workers. They're not protected by the Fair Labor Act that was in the 30s because they were excluded, mostly because at the time they were mostly African Americans doing the work, and it's a big barrier. So what are the biggest barriers you see to what you describe as decolonizing farming? And can you just take a minute to describe what is the colonization of our food system? Because I think people don't understand that we have a colonization of our food system.
Ooh, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, that was a lot.
That was a lot. Environmental justice, I agree, is absolutely a huge issue, first of all, because we're talking about who's getting environmental benefits and who's suffering from environmental harms. Pesticide exposure, extreme heat from climate chaos. We're talking about the
Abuse.
effluent from hog farms and, toxic
and
emissions.
Rights are, abuse, sexual abuse, and all sorts of,
So I'm glad that you mentioned, because those issues are certainly linked. I mean, the colonization of the food system is the imposition of European control, power, and European norms over our food system. And it's quite pervasive. I'll tell a quick story just to illustrate one example of it. You take maize, 9,000-year-old staple crop. It was a gift from Sky Woman to the indigenous people of Turtle Island of this continent. It was given to prevent starvation in combination with her sisters, beans and squash, to be grown together, right? You all heard of the three sisters.
Intercropping, right?
Yeah, and there's many origin stories. But the condition was the gift of maize needed to be shared freely. So the colonizers got some too, right, as a gift. That's how they stayed alive. But look what they did with maize. Tore her away from the sisters, monocrop, laden with chemicals, pesticides, leading to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, turned into corn syrup, pumped into the veins of our children, driving the diabetes epidemic, right? And genetically modified, BT, Terminator seed, all of this. And so
we could go on and on.
Looking at maize, right, is just one example of colonization of the food system.
What's really fascinating about this conversation is that if you do the right thing for the land, you do the right thing for humans, you do the right thing for climate, you do the right thing for biodiversity, do the right thing for our scarce water resources, right? You do the right thing for all the things that matter. You do the right thing for injustice, you do the right thing for our economy, you do the right thing for health. It's like, it seems like too good to be true, but is that how you see it?
I do think it's all really connected. Some of my mentors who taught me how to farm in Ghana, they're called the Queen Mothers. So these elder women who are just badass in every way. But they said, Amidede, is it true? Leah, is it true that if you have want to plant a seed on your farm in the United States, like you don't pray over it or sing or dance or say thank you to the ground, right? You expect the seed to grow. I admitted that was true. And they said, that's why you're all sick. You're all sick because you treat the earth like a commodity and not like a family member. And so I do think that the reverence that we have for the earth, by extension, the way we treat the land, is going to be mirrored in the way we treat ourselves and our human communities.
So true. I mean, I kind of came into this in college where I ended up going to this summer program called the Institute for Social Ecology, which was all about sort of understanding the challenge we're facing environmentally, to our land, to, women's rights, various injustices. And, one of the courses I took was biological agriculture. They didn't call it regenerative back then, but it was all about intercropping, cover crops, natural pest control through, various plants that you can use like marigolds to repel pests. It was fascinating. I learned so much. And, we made compost and it was like, and then I began studying these books like Soil and Health, and which was from Sir Albert Howard, who was a British guy who helped start the organic agriculture movement, and One Straw Revolution, and all these books, Wendell Berry's Unsettling America. And it just really shaped my thinking. So as I became a doctor, like all that was like in there, right? It was all sort of the underneath, my thinking about how we need to be in relation to the land. But what's really occurred to me now, on the other end of 30 years of that, is seeing all these chronically ill patients that are sick from the food they're eating. And then I realized that I can't stay in my office treating patients because it's going to be a never ending stream unless we go upstream and fix the food system and fix farming and everything coming from that.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a lot today about the role of the land in providing food and sustenance. Something I didn't know until, maybe 5 years ago is the role of land in all civil rights. If you look at the civil rights movement, it was Black farmers who were really the backbone. They provided all of the land for meetings, for people gathering to live and stay while they were doing voter registration campaigns. They provided the armed protection. They leveraged their land as collateral for bail money to get people out of jail when they were locked up. And so quite literally, it's not like you could rent the Sheraton for your NAACP convention in Mississippi. So the Black farmers were the ones who provided the material sustenance for that movement. As one of my elders, Baba Halfkenny, would say, without Black farmers, there would be no civil rights movement. And so I think about owning our own land, our own businesses as really the basis, not just for our material health, but also our capacity to resist and our capacity to make ourselves free.
Today, Black people make up only 2% of our farmers and 1% of our rural landowners. This is largely the result of discriminatory government laws and funding, as well as lack of legal and financial resources due to systemic racism. This decline of Black, brown, and Native farmers has had far-reaching negative impacts. It means a decline of wealth and continued generational financial hardship. It means a disconnection from history and cultural practices that connect people to the land. It also means that these communities don't have access to the same fresh, healthy foods as predominantly white communities. We know that your zip code is more important than your genetic code in determining your risk of disease and death, and that 70% of deaths are caused by chronic disease, mostly the result of our toxic food system. Lack of access to land and fresh food is a form of oppression, and it has set up communities for generational illness and strife. You can learn more about these topics in Dr. Hyman's full-length conversation with Leah Penniman. If you enjoyed this mini episode of the Doctor's...
So I highly recommend people looking up more about food justice, food sovereignty, and kind of different things about food justice, because there's really a lot to learn, and especially if you're interested in how systems work, it's definitely a system.
Coming up on this mini episode of the Doctor's...
And so thank you everybody for coming today and listening to my presentation. If you'd like to screenshot, these are all the references and content creators that I referenced today.